On a Saturday morning in April, Lucas Hargrove paid $100 at a local salvage yard and hauled home a car that looked as if it had been abandoned for generations. Its paint had worn away to exposed metal, rust had eaten through the roof seams, and the old license plate was barely legible. His neighbor, Diana Caldwell, stood at her front gate with a mug of coffee and laughed loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "You just showed your son the quickest way to throw money away," she called out. Lucas didn't answer. He simply looked at the battered car and got to work. Just 5 days later, a legendary racing icon pulled into that same driveway carrying a check worth $5 million. The question was simple. What was hidden beneath all that rust? Stay with this story, because the truth was something no one expected. Lucas Hargrove was 34 years old, living a life that never looked impressive in photographs. Every morning he was up by 5, making Wyatt's school lunch, checking the handwritten schedule taped to the refrigerator, then heading out to the converted garage behind the house where he earned a living as a freelance mechanic. Most of his work came through recommendations. It usually covered the bills, and on the months when it didn't, he quietly carried the burden without telling anyone. His wife, Sarah, had been killed in a highway accident 2 years earlier. The other driver survived without serious injury. The hospital debt Sarah left behind did not disappear with her. Lucas paid it off little by little, never making a show of it and never asking for anyone's pity. To most people on Marlowe Street, he was simply the quiet man with the pickup truck and the young son. They weren't exactly wrong. They just didn't know the full story. Wyatt was 7 years old, missing his front tooth, and never went anywhere without the stuffed bear he called Bolt. Sarah had given the bear its name on the day Wyatt was born because she had always loved racing, the rush of speed, and the scent of engine oil. One button eye had fallen off years ago, and the bear had been stitched back together twice with different colored thread. Wyatt never cared. Lucas rarely spoke about Sarah unless Wyatt asked. Whenever those questions came, he answered honestly, but he never brought up the memories on his own. His grief had settled inside him like silt resting at the bottom of still water, unseen from above yet always present beneath the surface. Elijah Cross was the only close friend Lucas had on the block. At 40 years old, he owned a small repair shop at the end of Marlowe Street and possessed the rare ability to know exactly when conversation helped and when silence was enough. On many Friday evenings he stopped by with sandwiches, and the two men would eat inside the garage while Wyatt finished homework at the workbench nearby. Elijah was the only grown-up Wyatt addressed by his first name, instead of calling him sir or uncle. Diana Caldwell had moved into the neighborhood 18 months earlier. Her home featured a black front door, a spotless white Audi parked perfectly in the driveway, and flower boxes beneath every window that somehow always looked freshly arranged. She was 31, worked as a real estate broker, and lived according to standards she had never consciously written down but enforced without exception. She wasn't intentionally mean. She simply spoke before considering how her words might affect someone else. During those 18 months, she and Lucas had probably exchanged no more than 40 words. Once, wearing what she believed was a friendly smile, she suggested he might be happier in a neighborhood that suited him better. Lucas had looked at her for a few seconds before quietly walking back inside. She saw that as rude. He considered it the only response worth giving. Marlowe Street was the kind of neighborhood where news spread faster than common sense. Houses were close together, windows overlooked one another, neighbors walked their dogs slowly, and everyone noticed everything. Whatever happened in one driveway became common knowledge by sunrise. Carter Voss had owned Voss Auto Salvage for more than 30 years on the east side of town, where chain-link fencing surrounded rows of wrecked vehicles, and the air constantly smelled of transmission fluid. At 60 years old, he relied more on instinct than research when pricing cars and parts. That Saturday morning, Lucas had stopped by to buy a carburetor for a regular customer, while Carter was clearing out a large collection of vehicles recovered from a private storage facility whose lease had expired. The estate manager wanted everything gone before Monday. Carter wanted the payment. Neither man believed fate had anything to do with it. As Lucas wandered toward the back of the lot, something caught his attention. The neglected coupe rested beneath the partial shade of an old rusted corrugated roof that had leaned crookedly for years without collapsing. It had once been painted black, though decades of weather had stripped most of the finish away, leaving patches of exposed metal and flacking paint. Yet its proportions felt different. The wheelbase stretched longer than expected for a car of that size. The windshield leaned at a sharper angle than any factory-built model from that era. Even the wheel arches had clearly been shaped by hand. Lucas recognized it instantly without touching it. Someone had devoted countless hours to creating this machine. Almost without thinking, he rested his hand on the rear quarter panel. Beneath the rust and dirt, the cold metal revealed subtle signs of handcrafted bodywork instead of machine stamping. The distinction was slight, almost invisible, but for someone who had spent a lifetime working on automobiles, it stood out immediately. Carter walked over behind him. "That one's $100, he said. "Take it today or it goes into the crusher Monday." Lucas remained silent. His thoughts drifted to Wyatt's shoes, which had been too small for nearly 6 weeks because there was never enough extra money at the right time. Then he thought about the unpaid electric bill waiting on the kitchen counter. Finally, he admitted to himself that he couldn't explain why he felt so strongly about a rusted car he knew absolutely nothing about. Even so, he handed Carter the $100. Before towing it away, he opened the driver's door to inspect the interior. As the door swung open, a small piece of an old sticker separated from the lower door frame and floated onto the ground. He picked it up almost absent-mindedly and slipped it into his pocket without examining it. Something told him it mattered, even if he couldn't explain why. Getting the car home was slow enough to border on ridiculous. Elijah's pickup pulled the dead coupe with a rope at barely 15 miles an hour, while its lifeless steering caused it to wander slightly behind them. They reached Marlowe Street around 9:40 that morning. By the time they rolled into Lucas's driveway, at least half a dozen neighbors were watching. One woman peeked from behind her curtains. 2 children stopped their bicycles in the middle of the street. A man walking his golden retriever froze at the corner. Diana stood waiting beside her gate. Lucas hadn't noticed her when he first turned onto the street, but somehow she had appeared at exactly the right moment. He clearly heard her laugh. He heard another neighbor chuckle before quickly stopping. Then came the words, "Poor kid." Those words landed closer to Wyatt than to Lucas. Wyatt stood near the driveway wearing his backpack, having rushed outside after hearing the truck arrive. Lucas never turned around. He shifted the truck into park, climbed out, and calmly told his son, "Go inside and bring me my tool bag." Wyatt glanced once toward Diana, not angrily but thoughtfully. Then he looked at the rusted coupe, exactly as Lucas had looked at it earlier that morning, tilting his head slightly as though trying to hear something no one else could. Without another word, he went inside. Lucas calmly unfastened the tow rope. He didn't hurry. He wasn't pretending to stay composed. He simply was. After surviving pain far greater than a neighbor's opinion, comments like hers no longer carried much weight. That night, after Wyatt had fallen asleep, Lucas returned to the garage. He switched on 2 work lights, turned on the small radio sitting between the socket sets and wrenches, and began cleaning the car with the same patience he brought to every job. Starting underneath and working upward, moving from the rear toward the front, he slowly removed decades of dirt so he could understand exactly what he had purchased. While wiping the driver's footwell with solvent, thick layers of grime peeled away. Underneath them, stenciled directly onto the floor pan, was a chassis number. He stared at it for a long time. It wasn't formatted like any VIN he had ever encountered. The prefix consisted of 7 characters beginning with the letters R, A, and C, followed by 2 numbers and 2 additional letters. He photographed it immediately. For nearly 40 minutes he searched online without finding anything conclusive. Eventually, he came across a reference mentioning a European racing registry that had used similar numbering patterns during the early 1970s, but the exact sequence didn't appear in any public database. He texted Elijah, "You ever seen a chassis prefix starting with RAC 67? 11 minutes later, the reply arrived. "Nope, go to sleep." Lucas ignored the advice. Instead, he reached into his shirt pocket and removed the torn sticker fragment from the salvage yard. Holding it beneath the work light, he examined it carefully. Most of it had disappeared over time. The adhesive had long since dried out, and the paper had crumbled around the edges. Only part of a logo remained, a stylized wheel beside what looked like a bold flame design. He didn't recognize it immediately. Still, there was something about its precise, confident styling that convinced him it hadn't been created for an ordinary road car. He carefully taped the fragment onto a clean sheet of paper before finally going inside. Early the next morning, Elijah arrived before the coffee had finished brewing because Lucas had called him at 6:45 and said only one sentence. "Come look at this." Elijah slid beneath the car on a rolling creeper and remained there for 5 full minutes without saying a word. When he finally emerged, he slowly sat upright and looked at Lucas with an expression balanced somewhere between concern and barely controlled excitement. "The frame has been reinforced by hand," he said. "Not at the factory. Somebody welded extra gussets onto every connection point. That's not something you throw together over a weekend." He shook his head. "That represents months of work by someone who absolutely knew what they were doing." Walking to the front of the car, he lifted what remained of the hood and leaned inside. "Lucas, this isn't a stock engine block. It's been bored out, modified, and machined entirely by hand." Straightening up again, he added quietly, "Whoever built this wasn't building an ordinary car. They were building it for a very specific purpose, and they had both serious money and serious expertise." Lucas had already photographed the suspension. Its geometry was completely wrong for a normal road vehicle, but wrong in the exact way that suggested purpose-built track tuning. Even the visible springs weren't standard production parts. They had been custom fabricated. That afternoon, Lucas discovered a specialized online forum dedicated to vintage racing vehicles. It was an old-fashioned, text-heavy website filled with longtime members who had kept the same usernames since the earliest days of the internet. He created an account, uploaded photographs of the chassis number, suspension layout, bodywork, and sticker fragment, then carefully explained everything he had discovered before asking if anyone recognized the car. By the following morning, 47 replies had appeared. For that community, it was an unusually large response. Several members insisted it was simply an exceptionally well-built kit car, assembled during the 1980s from racing catalogs and salvaged components. 3 members, all claiming professional backgrounds in motorsport history, disagreed. One user posting under the name **Garage Legend TX** wrote, "If that chassis number is genuine, you're looking at something that's been considered missing by this community for 15 years. Another member sent Lucas a private message. "Stop uploading public photos, trust me." Lucas printed the entire discussion and placed it inside a folder. That evening after school, Wyatt wandered into the garage carrying bolt and sat on his usual upside-down plastic bucket while watching his father continue polishing the rear panel. After several quiet minutes, he finally asked, "Does the car have a name yet?" Lucas smiled thoughtfully. "Not yet. "You want to choose one?" Lucas asked. Wyatt studied the old coupe with complete seriousness. He examined it the same way Lucas had in the salvage yard, head tilted slightly, as though the answer could be discovered in its shape rather than spoken aloud. After thinking for a few moments, he smiled. "Bolt." Lucas quietly placed the polishing cloth on the workbench. For a brief second, he didn't move. "That's a good name," he said softly before returning to work. On the fourth day, Lucas was repairing the passenger side B-pillar when something caught his attention. The paint in that area seemed noticeably thicker than the rest of the body. Using fine grit sandpaper, he carefully removed the outer black layer until another color emerged beneath it, a metallic white blue unlike anything used on modern production cars. The shade felt strangely familiar, the way an old song sounds recognizable even if it comes from an era you never lived through. He had seen that color somewhere before, in photographs. From that moment on, he worked with even greater care. Instead of restoring a vehicle, he felt more like an archaeologist uncovering history, removing one thin layer at a time and studying every discovery before moving forward. Then he found it. Hidden on the inside face of the B-pillar, where the closed door concealed it, was a mark stamped directly into the steel itself. It wasn't a sticker or an identification plate. It had been pressed permanently into the metal. There was a number. Beside it sat a stylized signature made from 3 connected letters. Lucas photographed everything. For 3 straight hours, he searched through online archives. Finally, just after 2 in the morning, he found an exact match inside a digitized automotive trade magazine published in 1983. The article described the collapse of a racing team that had operated throughout the American Southwest during the 1970s and early 1980s. During its peak, the team had earned a reputation as one of endurance racing's most technically innovative organizations. Near the end of the article was a short paragraph mentioning that several experimental prototype vehicles had supposedly been destroyed in a warehouse fire during the autumn of 1983. Among them was one special development prototype. According to the article, it had served as the testing platform for a revolutionary chassis design that never officially entered competition. Even so, its engineering concepts had quietly influenced endurance race cars throughout the following decade. Everyone believed the prototype had been destroyed. No one had ever seen it again. The signature stamped into Lucas's B-pillar belonged to Marcus Webb. The article identified him as the team's chief engineer. It also noted, almost casually, that Webb had died during a testing accident in 1982, 1 full year before the warehouse fire that was believed to have destroyed the prototype. The racing organization itself had belonged to a man named Dominic Ashford. Lucas remained in the garage until dawn filtered beneath the door. Elijah never intended to tell anyone. But after carrying such an enormous secret for 2 days, he finally told his wife because he couldn't keep it to himself any longer. His wife mentioned it to the woman living 2 houses away because the burden felt too heavy to carry alone. That woman repeated it to her husband and also to the man who walked his retriever around the corner every morning. By sunrise, nearly everyone on Marlowe Street knew some version of the story. It had reached that familiar neighborhood stage where everyone shared the same secret while pretending they didn't. 2 neighbors appeared at Lucas's garage with remarkably weak excuses. One claimed he needed to borrow a tire pressure gauge. The other asked whether Lucas had happened to see a missing cat. Both conversations ended the same way. Each visitor spent far more time looking past Lucas toward the old coupe than speaking to him. After thanking them politely, Lucas closed the garage door. He covered the car beneath a blue tarp. After the second visit, Diana finally heard the rumors. The story had passed through 4 different people before reaching her, smoothing out some details while preserving the important ones. According to the version she heard, the rusty $100 car Lucas had purchased might actually be worth millions. She laughed. "It sounds like something from television," she said. Still, curiosity eventually won. She opened her laptop and searched for Dominic Ashford. For nearly 20 minutes, she read article after article. She found photographs showing a lean, white-haired man in his late 50s, standing beside priceless automobiles at auction houses. A financial magazine estimated his fortune at well over $1 billion, accumulated through racing victories, early investments in automotive technology companies, and an extraordinary collection of historic vehicles whose values had steadily increased over 40 years. Near the bottom of one profile, almost hidden in a footnote, she found an interesting detail. For more than 10 years, Dominic Ashford had quietly searched for a missing prototype from the beginning of his racing career, a car believed to have been destroyed in a fire. Diana slowly closed her laptop. Standing at her kitchen window, she stared across the street at the blue tarp covering Lucas's car for a very long time. That afternoon, she knocked on his front door carrying a measuring cup. She claimed she needed to borrow a kitchen appliance. Lucas listened politely. "I don't have one," he replied. Then he closed the door. Not angrily, not disrespectfully, simply with the quiet certainty of someone who had already decided exactly how much energy that conversation deserved. She remained standing on the porch for a few seconds before returning home. Late on the 4th evening, a new email appeared in the inbox connected to Lucas's forum account. It came from Giselle Hartman. Her signature identified her as executive assistant to the office of Dominic Ashford. The email was brief. It explained that Mr. Ashford had become aware of the forum discussion and the photographs Lucas had shared. If Mr. Hargrove truly possessed the vehicle described in those posts, Mr. Ashford would greatly appreciate the opportunity to meet him personally. The message added that the meeting could be arranged within 24 hours, whenever it suited Lucas. It ended by asking him to confirm. Lucas read the email 3 separate times while sitting quietly at the kitchen table, with both hands resting flat against the wood. Then he stood, walked back into the garage, lowered himself onto Wyatt's overturned bucket, and called Elijah. "You awake?" "It's only 9:30, Elijah answered. "I just got an email from Dominic Ashford's office." Silence. Then Elijah spoke again. "Say that one more time, slowly." Lucas repeated every word. Another pause followed. Longer this time. "So, what are you going to do?" Lucas looked toward the blue tarp covering the coupe. "I honestly don't know yet," he admitted. "I just wanted to tell somebody first." "You told the right person," Elijah replied. "Now answer Giselle Hartman, you're meeting them tomorrow." The 5th morning arrived. It was another Saturday. Whether that was coincidence or perfect symmetry depended entirely on how someone chose to see it. Lucas woke at 5 as always. He brewed coffee. He prepared Wyatt's breakfast despite there being no school that day because routine formed the structure of their lives, and he saw no reason to dismantle it. He dressed in the nicest flannel shirt he owned. It was dark green and free of visible stains. For a brief moment, he wondered how that decision might appear to other people. Then he decided he didn't care. He wore the shirt. During breakfast, Wyatt asked, "Is someone important coming today?" "Maybe," Lucas answered. "Is Bolt staying with us?" Lucas studied his son for a moment before smiling. "We'll see what today brings." At exactly 9 o'clock, Elijah arrived without needing an invitation. He understood that some moments deserved a witness. He carried a tray holding 2 coffees and wore the expression of a man trying very hard not to reveal how much he hoped things would go well. At precisely 10 in the morning, a black Cadillac pulled up in front of Lucas's house. Lucas was already standing in the driveway. Across the street, Diana Caldwell watched from behind the front window. She had been waiting nearly 20 minutes, her coffee long since gone cold. Dominic Ashford wasn't the kind of man easily surprised. At 58, he was lean with close-cut white hair and the weathered hands of someone who had spent decades working instead of merely giving instructions. Without ceremony, he stepped from the passenger side and headed directly toward the garage as though he already knew exactly where he belonged. The moment he saw the car, he stopped. Giselle Hartman followed behind carrying a tablet before quietly moving to one side. Elijah remained near the garage entrance, not quite part of the meeting, yet present enough to witness everything. Dominic slowly circled the coupe. He examined it exactly the way Lucas had examined it in the salvage yard. Occasionally, his fingertips brushed the bodywork. Mostly, he simply looked. Several long moments passed without a single word. Lucas waited. Finally, Dominic stopped behind the car. His voice remained calm. "I thought it was gone forever." Lucas broke the silence. "You know this car?" Dominic turned toward him for the first time. "I built it." He paused. 1971. It took nearly 2 years, and it cost me much more than money. He turned back toward the coupe. In 1983, they told me it had burned in the warehouse along with everything else. He let out a slow breath. I believed them because I needed something to believe. Walking to the passenger side, he crouched beside the B-pillar. Again he fell silent. Carefully, he placed one finger against the stamped signature pressed into the steel. He left it there for nearly a full minute. Finally, he spoke. "Marcus Webb was my chief engineer. He died during a testing accident in the spring of 1982. He never lived to see this car race." He smiled faintly. "The truth is, it never raced at all. It was only a development prototype. We built it to prove a chassis theory Marcus had spent 4 years perfecting. The theory worked. It influenced endurance racing chassis for the next 15 years. Dominic slowly stood. Marcus signed every structure he built by hand. He always believed engineers should sign their creation the same way painters sign their canvases." Lucas finally asked, "If it never burned, what happened to it after the fire?" Dominic slowly shook his head. "I honestly don't know. Someone must have moved it before the fire started, or perhaps it wasn't even in the warehouse that night. I hired people to search for it twice. Eventually, I stopped looking." Then he looked directly at Lucas. "How did you find it?" Lucas answered honestly. He left nothing out and added nothing for dramatic effect. He explained that he had visited the salvage yard to buy a carburetor. He described finding the coupe abandoned in the back row, already marked for the crusher. He admitted that its proportions had caught his attention, and something about its shape had made him stop walking. Dominic listened without interrupting. When Lucas finished, he asked one final question. "Why did you buy it?" Lucas took his time before answering. "I can't completely explain it. There was something about the lines, the way it had been shaped. It didn't look accidental. It looked like something somebody had spent years thinking about." Dominic held his gaze. Marcus used almost those exact words. The very first time he showed me the original drawings. The garage became silent. Not an empty silence. The kind that carries weight because everyone present recognizes the truth that has just been spoken. A moment later, Wyatt appeared in the garage doorway. Bolt rested beneath one arm, while his other hand held the edge of the door frame. He didn't step inside. He simply watched. Lucas turned toward him. "Come here." Wyatt walked over quietly until he stood beside his father. Dominic looked down at the boy. Wyatt looked back at the older man. Then he glanced at the car. Then back to Dominic once again. "Dad named it Bolt," Wyatt said. A subtle change crossed Dominic's face. It was slight, but anyone paying close attention could see it. His eyes shifted from the boy to the old coupe, lingering on the name for a brief moment before returning to Wyatt. "That's a wonderful name," Dominic said quietly. Wyatt thought about that for a second before asking, "Did you miss it?" "The car." Dominic remained silent for a moment. "I did," he answered, "very much." Wyatt nodded thoughtfully. "My dad always says that when something really matters, you miss it." Without interrupting the moment, Giselle stepped forward and handed Lucas the tablet. Displayed on the screen was a single number. $5 million. Beneath it was a straightforward one-page purchase agreement. Dominic looked at Lucas. "I don't bargain over something like this," he said calmly. "That's what it's worth to the museum, and to me. If you don't want to sell it, that's completely your decision. You don't have to answer today." Lucas lowered his eyes to the offer. Then he looked toward Wyatt. Finally, he turned back to the car one last time. His eyes traced the familiar curve of the rear quarter panel, the elegant proportions, the steel that had spent decades hidden beneath rust. He didn't respond. Not yet. Later that evening, after Dominic and Giselle had left, Lucas remained alone inside the garage. Wyatt was in the house watching television. Elijah had stayed for about an hour before quietly heading home, wise enough not to force a conversation that hadn't found its words. Lucas found himself thinking about Sarah. She had always carried a sketchbook filled almost entirely with cars. They weren't engineering drawings. They were loose, artistic sketches, the kind someone creates simply because they love the subject. One design appeared again and again throughout the notebook. A long, low coupe. A sharply raked windshield. Rear wheel arches that looked sculpted by hand instead of stamped by machinery. Lucas had seen those pages hundreds of times without ever knowing what she had been drawing. Now he understood. Maybe she hadn't been drawing from memory. Maybe she had been imagining a car she'd only read about. His thoughts drifted to the name Wyatt had chosen without knowing any of that history. The stuffed bear. The prototype. Both carrying the same name because of a 7-year-old's quiet instinct inside a small garage on Marlowe Street. Lucas reached for his phone. He called Giselle Hartman. "I have one condition," he said. There was a short pause. "Tell me." "If I sell the car, it has to be displayed where the public can see it, not locked away inside someone's private collection." He paused again. "And on the information plaque, I wanted to say that it was restored and identified by someone who recognized its value when everyone else only saw rust. You don't have to mention my name, but Marcus Webb's name belongs there. And explain the engineering in language ordinary people can actually understand." Giselle answered immediately. "I'll speak with Mr. Ashford." Lucas waited. Exactly 8 minutes later, his phone rang again. "He agrees to every condition," she said. "And he'd like to add one more." Lucas listened. "He wants Wyatt's name included on the plaque. He says the car finally has a name, and the person who gave it that name deserves to be remembered." Lucas covered his eyes with one hand. He sat quietly in the garage for several long moments before finally speaking. "Please tell him, thank you." The following morning, Diana Caldwell stepped outside. Lucas noticed something unusual when he looked through the kitchen window. For the first time in the 18 months she'd lived there, she wasn't holding a coffee mug. No newspaper. No casual prop. She simply stood by her gate. A flatbed transport truck slowly reversed into the street. Lucas walked outside to oversee the loading. 2 restoration technicians carefully secured the lifting harness beneath the chassis, handling the car with something close to reverence. Diana crossed the street. She stopped several feet away. "I didn't know," she said quietly. "I mean, I couldn't have known." Lucas looked at her. There was no satisfaction in his expression. No victory. No bitterness. "It's all right, Diana." He glanced toward the coupe. "Next time you see somebody investing in something they believe in, maybe wait 5 days before deciding what it's worth." She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. A second later, she quietly turned and walked away. Lucas watched the technicians continue loading the car. Behind him, the front door opened. Wyatt stepped onto the porch wearing pajamas and holding Bolt beneath one arm. He watched the old coupe being lifted onto the truck. Then he slowly raised one hand. A quiet, respectful, almost ceremonial wave. Lucas noticed it from the corner of his eye. He didn't say anything, but he felt his throat tighten unexpectedly. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning, the money appeared in Lucas's bank account through a single transfer. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at the balance on his laptop for several minutes. The first thing he did wasn't celebrate. He called the hospital billing department. He paid every remaining dollar of Sarah's medical debt in one transaction. The call lasted only 4 minutes. When it was finished, Lucas simply said, "Thank you." Then he ended the call before the administrator could respond. He remained seated in silence. For the first time since Sarah's accident, the financial burden tied to losing her had disappeared. It didn't feel like winning. It felt more like opening a window during winter. The room was suddenly lighter. The air felt different. Everything could finally breathe again. A few days later, he bought Wyatt a new pair of shoes. The correct size. The exact pair Wyatt had quietly admired through a store window 6 months earlier, without ever asking for them. He also bought a detailed building block model of a classic endurance racing car. Handing it over, Lucas smiled. "I figured you might enjoy building one yourself." Wyatt stared at the box for a long moment, then looked up. "Can we build it together?" Lucas smiled. "Yeah, this weekend." Later that week, he called Elijah. He told him he wanted to invest money into the repair shop. Not through contracts or complicated paperwork. Simply between 2 friends who trusted one another. Elijah argued for a few minutes because he felt obligated to. Then he accepted for exactly the same reason. Together they decided to expand the garage, install a second vehicle lift, and hire an apprentice. Most of the remaining money went into a scholarship fund at Wyatt's school. Lucas dedicated it to Sarah. Its purpose was simple: helping children whose families quietly carried burdens that never appeared in school photographs. When the fund was officially established, Lucas skipped the ceremony. He mailed a short letter, signed his name, declined the invitation to speak. 3 weeks after receiving the money, Giselle Hartman called again. She invited Lucas and Wyatt to the opening of a new exhibit at the city's Transport Museum. The exhibition celebrated the engineering history of American endurance racing. Its centerpiece was the restored prototype. The coupe had been returned to exactly the way it looked in the autumn of 1971. It wore the original metallic white-blue paint Marcus Webb had selected decades earlier. Among Webb's archived notes was one handwritten explanation. He believed white blue looked like the color of something traveling faster than it should. Lucas drove Wyatt there on a Thursday evening. Wyatt wore his brand new shoes. Bolt rested comfortably beneath his arm. Dominic Ashford greeted them as they entered. He shook Lucas's hand, then knelt until he was eye level with Wyatt. The car stood proudly in the center of the gallery, perfectly lit, raised slightly on a platform that allowed visitors to admire it from every direction. It looked extraordinary, exactly what it had always been. A machine imagined decades before the world was ready for it. Lost for 40 years. Finally returned to the light. The information plaque hung beside it. Lucas read every line carefully. Marcus Webb's name appeared prominently. The engineering story had been written in clear language anyone could understand. It explained the revolutionary chassis geometry, the years of dedication, the influence his work quietly carried into future generations of race cars. Near the bottom, another paragraph described the discovery. It explained that the vehicle had been found in a salvage yard by a mechanic who recognized something unique in its proportions when others overlooked it. Below that, in smaller lettering, was one final sentence. The vehicle was named Bolt by 7-year-old Wyatt Hargrove, who believed it was simply the right name. And it was. Wyatt stood silently before the car for a long time. Without turning around, he finally asked, "Dad, is Bolt happy here?" Lucas looked at the restored coupe. He thought about Marcus Webb. 2 years spent creating something he believed in. 40 years hidden away beneath dust and rust. Then he remembered a little boy placing his hand on an old car one Saturday morning, as though listening to it. "I think he is," Lucas answered softly. "A lot more people get to see him now." Wyatt nodded. "That's good." He slipped his hand into his father's. "Can we get food now? The kind with the dipping sauce?" Lucas smiled. A genuine smile. The kind that appears before you've had time to stop it. Several visitors noticed. None of them knew why. "Yeah," Lucas said. "Whatever you want." By the end of the following month, a for rent ** sign stood outside Diana Caldwell's house. Officially, she explained to neighbors that her new office location made the commute impractical. That explanation was true. At least partly. Nobody on Marlowe Street said anything cruel. Sometimes life delivers justice quietly. Not dramatically. Just through the lasting weight of words spoken too quickly. Words that stay with you long after the moment has passed. Lucas kept his garage. The old radio remained on its shelf between the socket sets and wrenches. He still woke every morning at 5. The handwritten schedule stayed on the refrigerator. Friday evenings still meant sandwiches, coffee, and conversations with Elijah. Success didn't change him. It simply made him more secure in the person he had always been. Someone who now understood with complete certainty. The things most worth noticing rarely announce themselves. And the difference between something priceless and something worthless often comes down to whether someone is willing to stop, look carefully, and see what everyone else walks past. Some nights Lucas still thought about Sarah while working alone in the garage. Not aloud. Simply in the quiet way people continue conversations with those they truly loved. Not because grief never fades, but because love changes shape instead of ending. He often imagined Sarah standing in that salvage yard. He believed she would have recognized the coupe immediately. She would have walked straight toward it, placed her hand on the rear quarter panel, smiled, and quietly said, I know this shape. He believed she would have loved the name Wyatt had chosen. And he believed she would have been proud of him for seeing $5 million hidden inside a $100 car.